Thank you, everybody. That cut out 2 pages of my talk. That was great. I was going to introduce myself by giving a little history, and I've now heard it. So where necessary, I will point back to it. But I have a combination of papers in front of me, and I don't tend to be a speech reader, so bear with me. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave things out, so I wrote some things out, but I tend to work from mind maps. And so just bear with me, and we'll pull this together. I had to provide the title, I don't know, a good month ago. Connie was so insistent. She also wanted a 50-word abstract, and I said it doesn't exist. So I hope that in some way I'm addressing the title topic. Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Melissa. Thank you, Claire. Thank you to Connie, and a special thanks to Marie, who is the absolute example here. Now, my new example of the Jersey girl's tenacity, as she wouldn't take no for an answer, deeply engaged in a game of telephone and email tag, and got very involved in creative calendaring. I'm kind of proud of the fact that I got her to knuckle under and do some things for Snapshot Day in order to make this work. This was the only date, and I was supposed to be on the road for Snapshot Day. So we did things together, and I think you probably already had things planned, but we managed to leverage it, which worked out very, very well. So happy Snapshot Day to everybody, including those of you who are joining us virtually. It is a real delight to be here with so many librarians, so many New Jersey librarians, past, present, and future. It's just an absolute thrill. So let me get to my remarks and see if I can't address the topic at hand. As I said, I was going to start off with a little of my background, but I don't know that I need to do that. I think the only piece that was missing is that I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I think other than that, you guys have got my whole life. That and perhaps the fact that in addition to Michigan, Massachusetts, Maryland, Delaware, my husband and I lived in Pennsylvania for a couple years when our kids were very, very young. So one would think that I would not be at all daunted by driving in New Jersey, but I will tell you that's not true. So in 1997, I entered the land of state libraries. I had been a public librarian. I loved being a public librarian. I was that children's, young adult, and reference librarian that the students would come in after school, and by the time I'd spent 10 minutes with them, they're throwing up the sign of the cross, you know, lady, please go away, you've already given me more than I need. I enjoyed that job immensely. I really felt I had found my element when I got to state librarianship, however. I never have felt that I was the best detail-oriented project manager in the world, but I love the big issues. I love the policy, I love the concepts, and to have that opportunity to be working at the state level where you can talk about how you would help shape services within a larger unit of service, but still be close enough to see the impact. Was just a real joy. I became extremely committed to the work that was being done through our LSTA dollars, the Library Services and Technology money that comes from IMLS, or Institute of Museum and Library Services, and I do see grantees in the room, so I know people know of it as IMLS. I was so appreciative of it that when they unfroze the position of deputy for libraries, I applied for it. My daughter was in Washington, D.C. My husband is a Unitarian minister in Newark, Delaware. I'm having to practice between Newark and Newark. And this was going to work. It meant a divided lifestyle, and we thought just for a couple years, so I took that job. But a decade into being a Fed, I realized that as I thought, what do I want to do next? What would be the crowning glory to my real full-time professional career, although I'm sure I'll always work? I really wanted to look back at state librarianship. I'd only done it for 2.5 years. Every state is different, so I knew it would be new challenges. I had a real affection for what had been going on in New Jersey. I certainly found the geographic location, with my husband still in Delaware, a great plus. There were all kinds of reasons. It just looked like it might be too good to be true. So far, so good, though. Not too good to be true, just good enough to be true. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here. I do have some learnings I want to share, however. I was talking a little bit to Ross earlier, and I said something about New Jerseyans being so nice. I haven't encountered a New Jerseyan, imported or native, that I haven't just found incredibly friendly, helpful, etc. And I think, coming in from outside, as did Ross, that when you haven't gotten here yet, New Jerseyans can get a bad rap. But I think it's because of the driving. I really do. Honest and truly. I'd done that trip from Massachusetts to Washington so many times, and New Jersey was probably second only to Connecticut in terms of the points of dread on that route. So I have a few things I've learned. This is my 14th week. I have 13 life lessons or learnings from the last 13 weeks. Now, these are not library related, although we probably could expand them and make them either library, I don't know, principles maybe, or life lessons in general. So if you'll bear with me, we'll do that before we start talking about the value of New Jersey libraries. And poor Victoria, she's heard some of these already, if not all of them. So let me just dip in here and give you my learnings. I'm clearly already not following my mind map in any way, so we'll try to make sure we get through here. So as I've been a road warrior going through New Jersey, and I did in my very first podcast make a commitment to get to a library in every county by the time I get to my 1-year anniversary. Now, I'm not aiming too high. I'm not saying I'm going to get to all 430, whatever it is, 430 some Victoria libraries. I got 21 counties. I've got 12 months ahead of me. I may not want to drive around in the dead of winter, so we'll do approximately 2 a month, and I'll still have a little easier time maybe in January. So, road warrior I am, and we combine that commitment with some visits to legislators to do some meet and greet so that when we show up with the budgetary questions, we aren't just brand new faces. So I'm in Clifton one day, I'm in Plainfield the next day, I'm in Newark. I mean, I know this part of the I know this part of the state so well at this point in time. So I'm going to share with you my 13 learnings. The first 7 are those life lesson learnings. The last 6 are more positive statements, I promise you. My first week, as was noted by one of my dear introducers here, I started on July 23rd. I took that first week to learn my way around the library building, the State Library building. Now, I know this sounds like a simple, simple task, right? This is a building, 5 stories, and the ground level is 3. I'm sorry, that's not intuitive to me. But this is not my lesson learned. My lesson learned is that you should never assume that just because you know where you're coming from, you know where you're going. The State Library is a 5-floor building with this level 3 as the ground level. But I want you to be aware that when you come in from level 3 of the garage, you're on level 2 of the library building. You are literally walking through the door and you've changed floors. So I would say, if we're going to expand this, make this into more of a life lesson or library learning, that in these days of rapid change, you need to pay attention to the past, but not assume that it automatically positions you to predict the future. All right? That's my State Library building learning. Learning number 2. When plotting your route, make sure that you know whether you are heading to the township or the city or town proper. I assume that this statement requires little explanation for many of you, but my point would be make sure you have a clear vision of your destination, and then hopefully, even if you need to reroute, you will end up where you plan to go. My third lesson learned, when you're at an intersection or a decision point, make sure you look both ways. And this is not merely a cautionary tale with regards to the traffic. This is rather an observation that just because the road to the right has one name does not mean the road to the left has the same name. It's just not true. You can't make those assumptions. Likewise, when at a life or library decision point, also look both ways. Don't assume that two similar ideas will not have very different consequences, because they may. So number 4, again, there's a little progression here. Make sure you know whether you are heading to Hamilton, Washington, Spruce, Maine. It could have any one of a number of probably about 25 names. Street, road, avenue, place, or plaza. They may very well all exist in the same town and yet be blocks apart. The possible life or library lesson here might be to make sure that you know who you are serving and who you're not serving. They may very well all coexist in the same service area, but some are not as visible as others. Now, number 5 is very closely related to the tip above, but this one deserves its own bullet. Besides, it's about New Brunswick. And some of you who sat with me at dinner or met with me earlier in the week may have heard this before. Fair warning, even if you have followed the tips above, you may still be at a loss. It was my first trip to New Brunswick. I was invited to a meet and greet with a few friends and colleagues from the New Jersey Center for the Book. Betty watched me arrive late. Maria watched me arrive late. People saw me come in late. I was to go to the New Jersey Center for the Book group at the Rutgers Faculty Club. I didn't want to risk being late. This was an important meeting, an important group of people, and I really wanted to make sure I was there on time. So even though the directions said 45 minutes, I easily left myself another half hour to 45 minutes. I still arrived a half hour late. I was armed with 3 different sets of directions, and this could be the heart of the problem. This is over. Oh, there's Nancy. You were there that day that I was there. I was armed with too many sets of directions, none of which, were identical to any of the others. But I was leaning on the one in the car. I believe that I'm a safer driver if I'm listening to the audible cues as opposed to trying to read the directions. So that's what I'm listening to. I've got my Google, I've got my MapQuest on the car seat, but I have followed the directions from the navigation system. I could tell I was in the right area. Banners that said Rutgers. I knew that I was on the campus. My navigation system directed me here, there, everywhere, and ultimately into a circle behind a rather modern performing arts center, whereupon I was told, "You have arrived." And clearly I had not. So I tackled this the old-fashioned way. I asked for help. I will never forget the kind man in the white Bermuda shorts who was just simply out for a walk. I put my car in park, hit the flashers, got out, and approached him saying that I really hope you can help me. I'm trying to get to 100 College Ave. It's the Rutgers Club, the faculty club. I'm at a loss. My navigation system tells me that I'm here, and I'm not. I'll never forget him. The quote, "Oh, honey." "Oh, honey. There are 2 Rutgers campuses within the city limits, and they both have College Aves." Well, I guess they both have number 100 also. I see 2 valid lessons here. One is another reminder that although you may have multiple targets, then they may exist side by side. Now, all of them may not be reflected in your navigation system, whether it's your cars or whether it's your libraries. And second, people can always be your best resource. When in doubt, I would always go to a person. This is why I love librarians. Okay, number 6, read the signs. Another fair warning, do not trust the directions in the navigation systems, especially the courteous one that's built into the car. Now, I'm used to that kind of reprimanding tone from my Magellan that I no longer have, with its recalculating route, or the heavy sigh and the when possible make a legal U-turn. This one doesn't do that. This one just starts correcting you and trying to get you on the right path. So I think it was the day that I left Clifton. So I had ventured up New Jersey Turnpike, Garden State Parkway. I'm coming south. I get back on the New Jersey Turnpike, and I'm listening to the audible cues, and it's, keep to the left, keep to the right. And So I do it. And then all of a sudden, I've gone a few miles, and it's trying to send me off on all these exits. And I'm going, why is it? And I have no sense of direction. Clearly, I have no metal plate anywhere. Trying to send me off on exits. And ultimately, I really looked at the exits, and it was trying to send me to the Newark airport. And I was northbound on the New Jersey Turnpike. Now, I've been through that same intersection, I don't know, probably 5, 6 times now. Every time I listen, and this darn navigation system tells me to go through those toll booths and bear right, and that's the northbound lane. So by all means, make sure that you read the signs around you. With all the construction and new traffic patterns, I'm sure that that's what has something a little different in there. Either that, or it's trying to make sure I stay on the car and truck route instead of the cars. I'm just not sure. So personally, this is a, pay attention, Mary. My husband would say that. But it's also a good place to insert one of my favorite reminders. And to quote Mark Twain, a person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't. So shame on me. And at number 7, now this is my last one here that's actually kind of a lesson learned, and I'm struggling as to whether or not it has any possibilities in terms of expansion. But number 7, and maybe the most important, when driving in New Jersey, never look in your rearview mirror. I have a feeling when you're directing a library or making a life decision, it's probably good to know what might be coming up behind you. And you would want to be able to respect where you've been. So now for my positive learnings and experiences, and I will cease with the philosophizing here. I'll simply share. So my number 8, I appreciate the length of the merge lanes and the fact that the concept of zippering in actually works. Now, for some of you, I know I've had people say, oh, well, you've just been lucky. But if you've lived in Maryland or Delaware, where those merge lanes are maybe 25 to 50 feet long, nobody lets you in for anything. There's no time to even do the zippering. I'm also a big fan of the jug handles. Again, I've had people say, why? I never heard anybody say they love jug handles. Well, they aren't veterans of the 25 years I spent in those death traps called rotaries in Massachusetts. And I know you have rotaries, but I also understand they've been phasing them out. As for Delaware, it's all about the extra left turn lane. Well, this looks like a good idea, but it adds a good 90 seconds to every traffic light cycle, and it has created a whole culture of red light running so that it's a real hazard. So I truly do appreciate the jug handles. Number 10, I am delighted to find that there are alternate routes. Many roads, many options. So all those different sets of directions that have me confused on one hand, it's nice to know there are other ways to get where you're going. In that my commute that I used to take between Newark, Delaware, and Baltimore, Maryland, if there was an incident on 95, Route 1 and Route 40 immediately became parking lots. There was no way to get where you were going. You would literally add 3 hours to your 55-minute commute. They just were parking lots totally. Again, this goes back to my earlier comment about how friendly, how warm, how helpful I have found New Jerseyans. Once you get them out from behind their steering wheels, they are absolutely the best people ever. I could not be happier with my new neighbors. Number 12, and this in some ways is my favorite, and Victoria's the one who taught me this one very early on. Jersey girls don't pump gas. I love it, love it. And number 13, and this is the one that I would say is actually library related, although there are other library learnings on other lists. And this one is not exclusively about libraries, but I am so pleased with what I have seen in terms of the community commitment. The pride in the unique nature and modeling of service to meet the needs of individual communities. I absolutely respect this. I believe in the individuality of communities and the development of service models that meet those needs, but that does not mean that I don't believe that there is not a core purpose and that there shouldn't be some consistency. And I think that's a piece of my vision, if I'm to get back to what's supposed to be my title here. I do believe that there ought to be some things that are standards of quality and consistency across librarianship. And I'm not, I'm not talking unfunded mandates, but I am talking about a commitment to not having people unserved, making sure that there's not a vast discrepancy in what's available to one group of people over another. I do believe in a constancy of purpose at the core of librarianship. So as I ponder my vision for the future of New Jersey libraries and what I personally might be able to contribute to the energy, the vitality, and the capacity of the state's libraries and benefiting the residents, I anticipate that my actions and philosophy will support that core purpose and those principles that I feel are there. I anticipate many occasions to share my belief in this profession and advance those concepts. I know that we may have some time for communication tonight, but if we don't get to all of that, I would welcome anybody, everybody to please contact me at the State Library. One thing I know will come up when I attended my very first meeting, this was still in July, the end of that first week, I think the first question addressed to me was whether or not I was in favor of a statewide library card. Well, I know that's going to come up again and again. I'm not sure whether the answer to that issue is a statewide card. I don't know whether it's a statewide database. I worked in Maryland where there was phenomenal resource sharing across county lines. You know, anything, anytime, any place. You could live one place, want an item for another, work yet another, and want to drop it off while you were on vacation somewhere else. And the system was transparent enough to let you do it. In Massachusetts, the state aid system was designed in a way that as long as you met state standards and your neighbor did, if you didn't share your resources, you were impacting your eligibility for state aid in the future. You were getting state aid. It was a state commitment to the people of the state. And those are things that I really do feel belong there. Let me just take a quick look here and see what else I might get to. I think the other thing I'd like to touch on, and I'm not speaking on behalf of IMLS. I can't do that. I can't do that legally, and I would never try to do that. But I do think that one of the real benefits that I had shortly before I left IMLS was to be able to participate in the planning for the next strategic plan for the national program and see the concepts that were there. There were 5 goals. The first 2, I would say, are extremely outward-facing. They have to do with putting the learner at the center, having librarians positioned to be teachers of, trainers of, and very skilled themselves in what would be 21st century skills. 21st century skills not being creating new software or designing the next technological implement, but rather curiosity, creativity, the ability to collaborate, good communication, people who will be able to invent their own next job because things are changing so fast. As we would go around teaching, probably a couple years ago on 21st century skills, we would always describe the question as being, what is it that we need to have in our current institutions that will help today's kindergartners develop the skills they're going to need for the jobs they're going to get in 20 years. And it's clearly not the most recent software. It's clearly not a lot of the things that we do on a daily basis now. They will be obsolete. So it's that putting the learner at the center and making sure that the services we are designing aren't because it's good for the library, but because they actually will benefit people's lives. The second thing is to start seeing our institutions very actively in their role as community anchors. Community centers, but also technological anchors as we're entering the land of high-speed internet, broadband deployment. The FCC has mentioned libraries in that plan. They've talked about librarians and community technology centers as being places where digital literacy will be taught. So there is a role for us. We've even got other federal folks out there seeing that it's an appropriate role for us. I think that's a marvelous thing that trickles down. It's not just a federal goal. The third goal in the goal area, focus area in the national plan is around our collections. Care and preservation, sustaining the accessibility to collections for today and future generations. IMLS has just received another Connecting to Collections grant that will lead to training for people across the state with regards to best practices, good models. So you'll be seeing more about that. New Jersey's definitely right in line for that. The fourth area of focus is around information services policy, awareness and respect for copyright, sustaining access, intellectual freedom. And the fifth one is, again, one that I think relates to all of us, whether we're working at the state level or the local level, whether we're in a school, an academic institution, a special library, and that is models of efficiency, being the best you can be in maximizing your resources and what benefit is created by the resources you have to deploy. I think all of those translate for us. So I feel like that's a bonus that I got to bring along. I have one more link to my time at IMLS, and that really leads me down the path that I think we're still on. When I first started there in 2002, I was appointed by Dr. Robert Martin, who had been the Texas State Librarian and Archivist, and Bob, sadly for Bob, had some sort of a terrible schedule conflict, and he couldn't take his stump speech on the road. He had to stay in Washington. So as his brand new library deputy, I got to go to Hawaii. Like I said, sadly for Bob. So I went to Hawaii and gave my adaptation of his speech on the blurring of the boundaries. Now, this was something that he had developed while he was in Texas, and he was talking at that point in time about archives and libraries. And when he got to IMLS, looking at museums as well as archives and libraries, he started talking about that additional blurring of the boundaries between the professions. And he would point to what technology had done to us and for us in terms of online exhibits. And we had hit a point where here we had museum folks who'd never been dragged into the details of cataloging, having to catalog the items that they had on their online exhibits. And the librarians who had always been presenting information and the item, et cetera, but never gotten into the land of interpretation, if they could avoid it, all of a sudden having to provide curatorial background for the things that they were putting in their online exhibits. I think that's still true, but I think that the borders that are blurring at this point are different ones. In today's economic times, times when people are as stressed as they are, I would say that it's perhaps the social service arena in which we see, especially in our public, and maybe even in some of our school libraries, very permeable lines. There's a library, and I believe it's Cuyahoga County, it could be Cleveland, but I think it's Cuyahoga County in Ohio, that for among their professional reference desk staff, they have 3 people, not with library degrees, but who are professional career counselors. And they work that reference desk because that's what they're seeing as questions. I don't know what this bodes for library and information science training. It certainly doesn't make us obsolete. We're still the pros. But I think it does position us to need to think about where and how we reach out and fill gaps that may change and may flow through. There's another library that my colleague Peggy Cadigan in her presentation on the Essential Library has included, and it's the Alachua County system in Gainesville, Florida, where when faced with a space that was bigger than what they needed, the library director said, that's fine, we'll take it. And they rotate through on a regular basis, a notary, and several other government offices who come in and take up space there because of that community anchor, community center role that they are filling. I have two quotes I want to read, as well as one more person I want to reference, and then I will stop and open it up for questions. And I apologize if I've rambled all over, but for me, this all just, one flows into the next. So that's what you get, Marie. Sorry, Connie. No abstract. It was recently pointed out to me that it's possible to have that foresight about how librarianship will evolve. We've been evolving for, and I'm not going to say decades, I'm going to say centuries. That card catalog was a technology. We've used different technologies in order to meet our mission over the years. But I was recently told about a donation that came to the State Library a number of years ago. And in the details of the last will and testament of Florence Tischler, who named the State Library as the beneficiary in her will when she passed away 40 years ago, the funds were to be used for writings, and then further elaborated that the term writings comprises the use of written symbols which are translatable into communicated thoughts such as books, journals, magazines, films, tapes, musical inscriptions, maps, geographical globes, charts, phonographic records, and any other similar, already invented, or to be invented means of written symbolic communication. Well, Florence is now one of my heroes. I have another brand new hero who I understand is actually a Rutgers student. Yesterday, Victoria and I were at the Buckles Friends and Trustees Consortial Breakfast, and one of their scholarship students made remarks at the breakfast. Is he here? No, it's not Pierre. Yesterday, but although you might be one of my heroes too. This was James Filchek, and James was the one speaking yesterday. And he didn't make very long remarks, but he did close his comments with a sense of pleasure at being part of this profession and working in a library, which he described as being an organic entity in a community that was also evolving. And that's not a direct quote, but it was that whole organic, evolving image that I just thought was dead on. And to see people this young, this engaged, as many of my virtual attendees as well as the folks in this room, is just a thrill for me. Oh, hi, James. You're one of my heroes. Oh, he might even be able to give us the direct quote. Well, tell him to email me. I want that quote. But it does take me back to another young woman, and I am going back a decade here, but this, there are actually two young women that I would reference here. When I first started at IMLS, probably shortly after I got back from Hawaii, I was sent to New York City to the Wallace Foundation for a debriefing session on a project that had been done, I believe, with the Urban Libraries Council, and I don't know who else, working with libraries and juvenile justice systems for kids at risk who had gotten into trouble. And it was a 2-year project, and this was the finale. So the people who were brought together were the subject matter experts. And there were a number of people from libraries, but there were 2 young women from social service agencies, counselors, who had been part of this project. And they were both really quite young, probably early 20s. And the one young woman said that for her, she'd had a little bit of an epiphany. It had been an absolute joy to work with the library community. And that when she looked at her own career and what she'd gone through, selecting where she wanted to be and who she needed to work with and picking that target group with whom she wanted to spend her professional years, that she'd had to pick out not only an age group, this young adult group, but also a subject matter area for concentration that could have even been another graduate degree. And she said it struck her in the middle of this project that it could have been library science. That in that arena, she could have done really good work with the target group that she wanted to. It was just a wonderful interface arena. So I thought she was great, and I was, oh, you know, I've got another hero. And then her thunder was stolen by the woman next to her, who was another youngster, who talked about what she had learned during the year, not just through the project, but in looking at social service agencies in general, and that the agency for which she worked had had to undergo a takeover merger in the previous year. And that as they'd gone about this, they recognized differences in organizational culture, and it became very clear to her that there were two types of social service agencies, and that there were those that tried one-on-one to help individuals overcome the odds and improve their quality of life and what their situation was. And that there was a whole other category of social service agencies that tried to change the odds. And that's where libraries belong. Well, I don't have her name. I've never had her name from that, but she has been one of my guiding spirits. I have one last quote. This is another one of my favorites, and the person who introduced me to this quote is Kevin Cherry, who a number of you in the room know. Kevin and I, and this probably also goes back to 2003 or 4, before he worked at IMLS, were both guests in kind of a back-to-back double punch on the power of collaboration at the, must be Missouri Digitization Conference or something like that. They've done it a number of years. And Kevin, I don't know whether he introduced or wrapped up his talk with this. This is a quote from Wendell Berry, and I'm assuming many of you may know who Wendell Berry is. At one point he said he would never have a computer, so we're talking about somebody who's has very strong beliefs. And we were talking about cultural heritage agencies writ large and why we do what we do, and how in this day and age, you know, you get information on the internet, technology's there. Why do we need our institutions? I've had this hanging over my desk for the past decade, and I see this as being one that addresses why I do what I do. I feel like I backed into this profession, but once I got here, there was no going out of it. And this embraces museums, archives, school libraries, academic libraries, public libraries, historical museums, all those things that I believe are still critically important to the health and survival of our communities. This is from the work of local culture. When a community loses its memory, its members no longer know one another. How can they know one another if they have forgotten or have never learned one another's stories? If they do not know one another's stories, how can they know whether or not to trust one another? People who do not trust one another do not help one another, and moreover, they fear one another. And this is our predicament now. Thank you for your attention. Are there questions I can answer? And if you're one of those virtual listeners, you don't come to the mic, you send it to Mike. Right? Got it? I'm seeing a tentative hand in the back. Okay, but then you have to speak clearly because I have to repeat it in here if you don't come down here for the sake of the transmission.
So New Jersey, in terms of like socioeconomic demographic, is very, you have like the top outline, different like the most expensive zip codes, all the way to like cities like Camden. So how do you, or
Okay, the question, for those of you who couldn't hear her, the question is, given the diversity of New Jersey, specifically economically, where we've got the top of the top, but we also have people who have very little, she wants me to solve this. She wants to know how I would propose being able to meet the needs of those who are less well advantaged. I got it correctly? Well, I don't have the answer. And I don't intend to solve it alone. I do want to see us make progress in that area, but I very firmly believe that I can't do that without the people in this room and a number of the other rooms I've been in the past 13 weeks, because I can't come in from outside and lay on top of this model that's going to work for here. You all live it, you know it, and that input has to be there, that understanding. I initially looked at the numbers and said, oh, look at this. We've got people who are literally unserved. They're people who do not technically have a library. And my dear colleague Victoria said, Mary, be careful where you go here, because some of those people don't have service because they've opted not to have service. Now, if they've opted not to have service, I can't make them my cause. But there are some people who fall within that geographic range who did not necessarily choose not to have service. And I'd like to think creatively. I don't know whether it ends up falling to the state library, whether we turn to our consortia, whether we try to find a way to incentivize the appropriate amount of money going into a neighboring county, community, consortium system, in order to make sure that the level of service for everybody goes up, because there is more money coming in, but we aren't expecting that one little town is going to build a library from the ground up and be able to create quality service. We could leverage that money by putting it into an existing, well-funded, but not serve these on the backs of these. So I think there are ways to do it. I don't think it will happen overnight, but I would really like to see those conversations start. Yes, Connie.
In front of all these students, here's something. If you were in library school right now facing the future, what's the class or area of study you would think everybody in this room should take before they graduate?
Wow. That's a great one, Connie. When I went, and I was on the forever plan through Simmons. I was working full-time. I was already a director of a very small library, and I had to go in and ask Dean Knowles to give me an extra semester because I wasn't going to make it in time. At that point in time, I had 3 classes that I felt were absolutely critical to what I did. I'd have to think about whether those 3 still might hold validity, even though the tools you would use would be different. Those 3 were an introduction to reference early on that taught me how to not assume that I knew what the person was asking without doing the appropriate probing, and how to find the right resource. It was also an intellectual freedom course that I absolutely adored. I just found it wonderful. But the one that I felt really gave me a little bit of everything I needed to know to run my small library was a collection development course taught by Sheila Intner, and she taught everything. I mean, she started us off writing the position description for the collection development person, and I wrote my position description and I turned it in, and she handed it back to me and she said, well, nobody would do this job for that salary. And I said, that's already what I make. But in any case, those are the things that I thought then. Now I'm not sure that it's a class that's actually taught in library school. It may have more to do with those 21st century skills and our need to be and stay flexible and adaptable. And don't take that to mean that I don't think the courses that are taught in a library and information program are good. That philosophical grounding is what gives me my core belief in the value of what we do to improve the quality of life for individuals in their community and in bigger society. So I think there's a philosophical grounding that's needed, but I don't I don't know that I ever took a class that said this is the philosophy of librarianship. Did you have something in mind when you asked me?
Well, if there were a way to teach going with what's going, that would be the one, I guess.
Mhm.
But,
I don't think we have that curriculum yet. Somebody needs to write a grant.
I just got to tell you, Sheila Indner teaches for us. Now.
Does she?
She's teaching cataloging right now.
That was the class that I thought I have now really got the basic framework. Now,
Sheila Indner, some of her students.
and this was forever ago. This was probably in the late 80s, early 90s. And my other two were both taught by A.J. Anderson, and I literally worship at his feet. So but those are the pieces that got me going. But you're right, it probably is the change management piece. But in that change management, there clearly has to be that real grounding in, why are we here? What is it that is our calling? I mean, if you're married to a minister, even if it's a Unitarian minister, I'm used to the sense that he has a calling. And at one point he said to me something about, well, when did you know you had this call? Because he feels I'm so passionate about this, that clearly I have a calling. And I said, I backed into this. I had an art history degree. I couldn't type. I'd worked in the middle school library. I went to the library. I got a job, and I was hooked. I just, it was a fuzzy vision, dumb luck, all those pieces playing into it. So I don't think they have a course in that. Yeah, Michael.
You talk about cross-functional talents that should be talent to empower the library and community to see those talents. When you look at where we are in communities here, with people being unemployed, or people being in trouble, people sustainability trouble, where would you see the library, I guess maybe you state level, initiating services that would truly be tangible? What can libraries really do right now, where people are, job loss, this issue that people are going through? Where would you feel that the libraries would be most effective and be more tangible to where people feel that this is a place that they can go to solve problems, to find answers to things that they need? And not just, when I say state level, I'm talking about programs that can be cross-community relationships, whether you live in Camden or you live in Bergen County, or that's.
Well, again, I just don't feel like I have all the answers. I feel like these are things that we will come together to solve. But in that vein, I think that probably the library positioning the library staff positioning the library to be that collaborative agent in town to help to build on those other resources. I think what's happened with the New Jersey Works Project and the BTOP grant and all the workforce development, the bringing of people from the State Department of Labor into the state library, getting libraries mentioned in the new plans for serving the needs of adult learners with regards to literacy. It's using the influence that the state library may have, using the influence that the local libraries will have, using the influence of the school library in the school to try to bring together the right partners and do that collaborating. When we first, at IMLS, when they first partnered in the Big Read, which came out of the National Endowment for the Arts, not from the library community, and the library community was really ticked off, especially since the report had a picture of a dusty old reading room on the front of it. We put Laura Bush money into that because we felt librarians had to be part of that conversation, whether we should have been the ones putting out the report to begin with or not. National Endowment for the Arts did great work, designed wonderful curriculum items, wonderful reader's guides. The reason we put the money in it, and the reason that I could rationalize that it came from the Laura Bush pot, was that there was a mandate in that program that the library either had to be the lead or the primary partner. And we already, even though we hadn't put it out yet, were in the land of 21st century skills and recognizing that collaboration was a 21st century skill, and if our librarians did not get out from behind their own walls and get to the community table, that they were going to be lost. Even in the year that they did the pilot with the first 7 communities before IMLS put any money into it, the results came in indicating that once invited to the community problem-solving table, librarians were being invited back because they were being seen as good community players, as bringing resources, and as being part of the solution. And until they were enticed out with this grant money around this project, they had, you know, they were an inherent good. Why did they have to get out of their walls? You know, mom and apple pie and libraries and were good things. But if we don't fight for a place actively solving problems in this economic era, we will become nice to have, not needed to have. Anything else? Yes, Claire.
Well, I'm curious about what you say or what you will say to state legislators when you talk with them, because they have many constituents and their staff have many things to see in probably limited time. So what things do you emphasize with them about the value of libraries? How do you convince them that it's something that should be paid attention to?
Well, we do, I do feel that the, yeah, paid attention to and funded. I think that this BTOP grant and the real efforts around workforce and small business, entrepreneurial development, all of that stuff has paid us back in spades. I don't know how much time went into writing the grant, but this has been a real boon. So that is something that we can point to very easily. We've also, I mean, I've seen some wonderful model projects here, and they were in my notes, and I apologize, because they're some of the New Jersey projects that I've seen that I just think are stellar models. The adult literacy setup in Plainfield, and the Rutgers students come in and train the trainers who are going to turn around and train the learners. I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful project. The Newark Library has a waiting list of 285 people on their English as a second language class list. We know that early literacy is important. There are so many things we can point to in terms of the value of libraries in the land of early literacy and school readiness. Let me see, I'm trying to think what other projects I had pulled out, but they're great models. I think it's Monmouth County that they have book discussion groups and collections that support them in 8 languages. Well, if we can at least, and I mean, this goes to my Wendell Berry quote, we are such a diverse state, and changing on a daily basis, but we've got to present that place where people can come together and help solve community issues. So far, the visits have been very positive. I think my favorite, although I've got 2 really good ones, but my favorite was just, maybe it's just yesterday morning. No, it wasn't yesterday, it'd be the day before. It was sometime. Kathy Pfeiffer and I went over to the State House to go in and visit with a senator, a very influential senator, who immediately made it known that she loved libraries. She uses her library. When she's in California, she takes her grandchildren to that library. But she's starting to ask, well, what does the state library do? And I'm saying, well, you know, I'll chime in, but I'm really not the pro. I've got Kathy with me. Kathy can help, you know, fill in details, but, you know, we've got this phenomenal law library. Certainly one of the best in the state, if not a stellar example nationally. We support, to some extent, the students at Thomas Edison. We certainly meet the needs of people who come in, and more people are coming in now that a number of Trenton branches are closed. And I started talking. She came up with a question. Kathy's taken down the question. She said, we could hardly get our story out because her aide kept interrupting, saying what a great place it was and how much money it saved the legislators and the research he'd done there and the great place it was. And we said, would you go to the other offices with us? I mean, it was phenomenal. There's been a lot of hard work done in the past. New Jersey Library Association, Norma and her team. So there are some really good relationships that are already built there. We're currently crafting our list of, what are the top priorities